Hello and very warm welcome to all of you in this special show called Samvad. Today my guest is the person who wears many hats, or we can say that he has got many feathers in his cap. He is a Vedacharya, an author, yoga, Ayurveda and Jyotish teacher. He is Dalit and Padma Bhushan recipient. He was born as a Catholic in the United States and embraced Hinduism, deeply delved into Vedic knowledge. He has written more than 30 books on topics such as Vedas, Hinduism, Sanatan Dharma, Yoga, Ayurveda and Vedic astrology. He has started web-based educational center on Vedic studies called the American Institute of Vedic Studies in United States. Dr. David Frawley, or we can call Dr. Vamadev Shastri. Very warm welcome in the Lok Sabha TV, Dr. Frawley.
Thank you, Anurag. It's very wonderful to be with you.
Thank you. Many people in India still think that you have done more than enough for the Hinduism than the Hindus in India. How do you take this? As a compliment or something else?
Yes, I take it as a compliment, but I also take it for the Hindus as a call to action for all Hindus to do more. Because very much more can be done. There are so many wonderful teachings that need to be expanded, shared, adjusted to the modern times, and perpetuated for the future.
And if you can go back to the past and then can talk about that, what motivated you? What was the point that you thought of embracing the Hinduism? What was the time and what are the things that you normally took this decision?
Well, you see, it was a long process of my own life growth and intellectual and spiritual search. Growing up in America, particularly in the late 60s into the 70s, we did have exposure to the teachings from India through various gurus. Paramahansa Yogananda had started a center there even before. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Prabhupada, so many gurus had come to India. So I was able to contact those teachings at a young age when I was still in the formative aspect of my thoughts. And then in my late teens and about the early college era, I studied various philosophies of the world, including the Western philosophies from Marxism to existentialism, and then the Eastern philosophies, and I always had a kind of, we might say, more mystical bent of mind. So I looked into teachings of Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Sufism, many traditions. But I found that the Vedantic teachings most resonated with my worldview and inner intuition, particularly the teachings relative to karma and rebirth, moksha and self-realization, cosmic consciousness, recognition of many lives, and the influence of India's great gurus to come into contact and to see the teachings of figures like Raman Maharshi, Sri Aurobindo, and starting with Vivekananda. And this whole tradition was a very powerful experience because we really didn't have these type of figures in the Western world and also in kind of as the European cultural leaders. So I delved into the philosophy also, which a lot of the other people studying yoga and things that my generation did not do. And first the Vedanta, and then in my study of the Vedanta, I came into contact with Sri Aurobindo's works relative to the Vedas.
That's right.
And that inspired me to look into Rig Veda itself. And then I continued to study in these fields. I was able to correspond with Anandamayi Ma, the great woman guru saint of India, even before I came to India. And then I did some research of my own. And I shared that with M.P. Pandit, the secretary of the Aurobindo ashram, that was visiting the United States. This was in my fairly young period in the 70s also. And I said, this is my research and I'm just sharing with you, what can I do with it? He says, this is important work and I'm going to publish it in India.
Really?
And I said, but I'm not an academic scholar. He says, but more of a sadhak. And he says, yes, but that's why your work is better, because you're embracing it from the inside of the tradition and looking at experiences in higher consciousness, not just simply in rational or textual analysis. So he began publishing my work extensively in India. And as I studied the Vedic teachings, I also became involved with the Ayurvedic medicine.
And it was probably in the 80s or in 70s?
No, I started with these teachings back in 1966, 67. But my work wasn't published in India until the late 70s.
Late 70s,
and, particularly after the beginning of 1980. And I didn't visit India actually until after 1980 also. So I'd done a lot of this research before.
Okay.
And then coming to India, I was able to visit with many gurus and teachers in these different fields, including at the Ramana Ashram, at the Aurobindo Ashram, figures like Sadhguru Shivananda Murti in Andhra Pradesh, Swami Dayananda of the Arsha Vidya, Swami Veda Bharati, many teachers in different fields, Dr. B.V. Raman of the Jyotish, Dr. Balavashta, great Ayurveda Acharya. So I was able to connect with the teachings at a personal level and in all aspects of life. And then I began to see how the Hindu Dharma had been distorted historically through the Vedic text. And then, because I could see, for example, when I studied the Rig Veda, I could find more than 150 references to the ocean, and yet we were told that the Vedic people came from the northwest where there was no ocean. And I could gradually understand the philosophical, cultural prejudices that the Hindu Dharma had to suffer. And then some of my teachers, particularly Dr. Balavash, said, "Oh, why don't you officially become a Hindu?" And I said, "That's basically what I do anyway, so why not do that?" So there was never a formal effort or a something that from the outside. It was just a continuation of my own motivation and understanding that led me by degrees to go from yoga and Vedanta to Vedas and to have a greater understanding of the Sanatana Dharma. So I embraced the Hindu Dharma from that side.
And you started your center in which year in America?
Well, I started what I call the Vedic Research Center as early as 1980.
1980.
Yeah, because that was mostly I was doing research work in the Vedic text and other teachings at that time. Later on in the 80s, I expanded more into the Ayurveda because that was a very practical way of sharing the teachings with everyone. Okay. And also of having more practical relevance. So I started an American Institute of Vedic Studies in 1988, and since then we've expanded it more via the new technology, the internet, and all of that. But I also helped with the founding of various Ayurvedic and Vedic and Jyotish schools, and interacting with these Vedic groups not only in America and India, but also North America, South America, Europe, Russia, other countries, and then having this role on the India side, because I've been kind of like a bridge between East and West.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But different people go different ways. So for the people in the West, I'm kind of a way to help them understand the Eastern Vedic traditions that is sometimes hard for them to make sense of via the terminology and the cultural differences. At the same time, in India, I've also become a voice to awaken the Hindus and promote the cause of Vedic education within India.
Why? What is the reason that, you are so popular now, your tweets are followed and retweeted by so many people. Yes. What is the reason that you think that people are finding their voice in you?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I remember years ago, I was on a panel on medical research and yoga in Mumbai. I think they may be late 1980s. And there were 9 Indian medical doctors, and I was the only Ayurvedic voice from the West. And someone in the audience remarked that we in India only appreciate something once it's re-imported.
Yeah, that's right.
So that is, I think, is part of it. Also, I think some of us from the West may have a better English idiom for expressing things to the modern generation that may know the English language better. And we've also tried to because it's coming out of our own personal experiences, it's not just simply a matter of our tradition or our family, but it's something we've picked up through our own convictions and our own, what we've experienced.
Can I ask you in the set, Keith, that we have been made to believe since last 200 years or more than 200 years by the Britishers especially, not to feel good about our own culture, our own traditions, and we have been made to feel believe inferior in terms of the linguistic division.
Yes, that's been the unfortunate case. The colonialism we know, it's happened all over the world, not only on what were regarded as more primitive societies, but even advanced civilizations like India and China that had been going on for centuries or thousands of years before the European civilization arose. In India, you also had the European British education, and there was also a continuation of a lot of the colonial narratives within modern India via the educational system and a lot of the writers. So I think that was the experience of many people. Yet when we see just to the opposite, Swami Vivekananda goes to the West as early as 1893. He uses Vedantic ideas, and he's embraced by the most educated people in the Western world. So if we take these Vedic and Hindu teachings and put them in a modern idiom relative to science, relative to the understanding of consciousness, we find them embraced by the higher levels of society, and even the Hindus in America are now among the most affluent and educated of the groups.
You also say that India has to emerge once more as a nation, as a cultural, as a civilization, and kind of eschew this term of the philosophy of what you call secularism.
Yes.
Do you believe that this should be done?
Yes. Well, first of all, India is a great civilization. It's not a nation state like France or Germany or the United States. It has been one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in the history of the world, and it's been the most ancient and continuous through time, and has even survived to the present day. So it's very important that that civilization, its great teachings, its art, its spirituality, its literature, and its science awakens and flourishes. And that was one of the inspirations of the Indian independence movement itself, whether through Tilak or Aurobindo or Gandhi, that there was a tendency to forget after independence and the attempt to westernize and modernize India, and thinking that required the expense of the older traditions, when now we see that a lot of these traditions of learning and knowledge within India are very helpful to modern knowledge, and particularly for the information technology era.
Okay. This time for the short break, and we'll come back. We'll talk about also that some of the Indians who also think that being an American Hindu or being an American citizen, you normally criticize the Indian or give the comment to the Indian political system. What do you have to say when you say something about what's going on in the Indian political scenario? We'll discuss after the short break. Welcome back. We are talking about, we are talking to Dr. David Frawley, or we can say the Vamdev Shastri, renowned scholar, Vedic scholar, an author, and quite a renowned voice as far as the Hinduism is concerned in the West. Many people, some of the Indians say that, okay, you have started giving your voice as far as the Indian political scenario is concerned, what's going on in India. And they call it that you as an American Hindu commenting on the Indian politics, or it should not be done.
Yes.
What do you have to say about this?
Well, I think there's a couple of things behind that. One, me being an American, and two, me being a Hindu or a Vedic scholar. But the fact is that the Hindu Dharma has always addressed the social issues. It has always looked at the state of the world, and everybody does it today. Indians are always commenting on American politics, as you know, and they're often commenting on other various religions of the world in various ways. So I think this comment against me has mainly been raised by people who may not want to hear what I have to say.
Yeah, probably right. Yeah.
And many of these same groups do quote American, Western authors and writers in various contexts, or even follow them in terms of their own social, political, intellectual, or even spiritual views. So I'm happy that I'm raising these questions, because the truth is that what is happening in India socially, politically, culturally is not very well known in the West at all.
Okay.
And it's not very well understood in India. And the predominant voices that are determining or relating this narrative in India are still very westernized voices. And because I understand the Western mentality coming out of it, and understand what its values are and where it is leading people, then I feel it's sometimes necessary to make a statement and to raise certain issues. Because again, India is a great dharmic civilization, as we say. So we cannot simply reduce it to the values and ideas of Western civilization. It's not that the Western civilization ideals are necessarily wrong, but they are a different language, and they don't necessarily work in the Indian context, whether it's right or left, or socialism, communism, or whether it's religion in the Western sense of the term. There are different values and different traditions here that have to be understood. And if we look at them in their original light, they have tremendous relevance to all human beings.
Do you think that because probably at this point of time, the Indian political discourse has been highly polarized as for the right, as being the right or the left? So probably your views are considered as a, what do you call, pro-rightist or let's say the Hindu Dharma, so probably the leftists or the Marxists don't like it.
Yes, but it's very interesting because in America, everything I stand for as ecology, as natural healing, as yoga, meditation, nonviolence, animal rights, it's called left-wing.
Okay.
It's only in the Indian context that we would be called right-wing. But again, in India, it's a question of dharma. It's not a question of right or left. For example, the pro-Hindu forces that are called right-wing would never be embraced by the right-wing in America or the right-wing in Europe, which have very different values. So these are distorted political discourses. And also the left in India is much more far left than the left is in America. For example, the left in America generally supports things like vegetarianism, whereas the left in India takes pride in eating beef as a place to start off with. So we must understand these issues in their own right, apart from political slogans, but name-calling has always been part of certain political discourses. And these issues in Indian politics have been going on for a long time, and some of them go back almost to the independence era. Actually, independence era had a bit different discourse. A lot of the voices of the independence era are making the same statements that other people would call right-wing today.
Okay, do you think that there is a perceptible change in the people's attitude after 2014 when the Narendra Modi government came into the center in Delhi? There started a debate on intolerance or what you call award wapsi. What do you think? What is your understanding about all these things?
Well, you see, once the political discourse in India changed in 2014, then the criticism started to come from another side. And so issues were raised that were kind of reflecting a certain political distortion or an attempt to create a certain political view. For example, Hindu reconversion was said to be bad, but nobody questions conversion itself as a problem. And we know conversion goes on in India. We also know it has financial backing behind it. So if conversion is good, then why is reconversion bad? And if conversion is questionable, then reconversion may have certain value. Then there's the whole issue of intolerance. Let us be absolutely clear. There is greater diversity of religion in India than in any other country of the world. Pakistan, the Islamic world doesn't have it anywhere. China doesn't have it anywhere. The United States has some freedom of religion, but it doesn't have the variety. There's even a greater variety of Islamic sects like the Ahmadiyas and like the Shias and some of the Sufis in India that you don't find in Pakistan, who are oppressed in Pakistan. India is the largest and the most open country for Christian missionaries. The Islamic world does not allow them in. China does not allow them in. So when you're criticizing India or even Hindus as intolerant, that is not really the case. And it also is often creating a certain distortion, because India was under siege during the colonial and the Islamic periods, forced conversion, prevention of temples from being built or temples actually being destroyed. And it was only since independence that there has been a freedom for the Hindu community and even some of the other Buddhist, Jain communities in India. So they have been the victims of intolerance throughout history. And as a majority in India, they have a right to have an influence you shouldn't, it's always a fact that there is a certain culture behind a country. So India's culture does have this Hindu dharmic orientation, and it has a great beauty to it.
Okay.
So there's no problem with honoring that. That shouldn't be called intolerance. In fact, it is the most pluralistic and open of the spiritual traditions.
So do you think that this narrative of intolerance is politically motivated?
I would say largely so. Obviously, there is intolerance to some degrees in various communities. At the same time, it corresponds to a period in which there is a jihad going on worldwide, terrorist jihad, in which India is a target. It's also going on in a period when communism has been rejected all over the world.
All over the world.
But it's still surviving in places like Kerala, and it's a Stalinist form. You know, I was just in Kerala, and I drove down the road and saw a gathering of the CPI of Kerala with a poster of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin for the gathering. You will not find that anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world.
So we have found that a lot of the groups that are saying intolerance in India are the ones who have lost power. And I think to a great extent they may also be criticizing loss of power and loss of privilege. But certainly there's always some degree of intolerance in different people, and we should try to reduce that as much as possible, but not target the more tolerant communities for intolerance. And
so do you believe that the Hindus are, by and large, are most tolerant society in the world?
Well, certainly history has proved that.
History.
With all the refugees of different religions coming to India. The Parsis came to India, the Jews came to India, Christians came to India. Various Islamic sects have also come to India, as well as India having Jain, Buddhist traditions, and Sikhs, and all the rest of it. So I think history bears that out, and the diversity of institutions and gurus and temples and activities we have here.
Okay, what do you have to say about that? In recent time, there is also discourse about that Indian political modern history has been very skewed, or what you say, has been twisted. So, do you believe that the Indian political modern history should be rewritten, or should given a thought of rewriting?
Well, first of all, the history of India altogether should be rewritten from the most ancient period.
Okay.
And basically, the sad thing we see is that what is in the history books in India today is still the old colonial narrative, with a little bit of Marxist changes. Whereas in the post-colonial era, all over the world, the histories of Africa, the histories of America and the native peoples have been rewritten to a great extent. I mean, still more work needs to be done. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia has rewritten all of its textbooks. China, though it has continued, communism now is opening up Confucian schools throughout the country. And they have a big Buddhist city, and they're embracing their traditions. So what happened in India, after independence, a different mentality took over the country. One that was more Marxist, more leftist. And these people wrote the post-independence history books, which was a very different view of history than the independence leaders. So naturally that should be challenged. Sometimes I like to say in a humorous way, it's not about saffronization of history, it's about taking the red out. And moving,
taking
the red out and moving into the post-colonial, post-Marxist era, where dharmic traditions can be honored. You know, the same communists were against the Dalai Lama. They were also against Buddhism. They still are to a great extent. The dharmic traditions and their history should also be told. Maybe it's not perfect, maybe it has its own dark sides, but it also has a lot of brightness to it and a lot of benefit. So that dharmic history of India should be taught, honored, and accepted. But also things that happened in India. Thousands of temples were destroyed. You know, Shashi Tharoor wrote a book on how the British oppressed India. But what the British did really wasn't fundamentally different than what the Mughals or even the Delhi Sultanate did. The Delhi Sultanate was probably the worst in destroying temples. They destroyed the Nalanda University, which was huge. So it's necessary to accept that fact of history, not to criticize people of different faiths today,
but to
face the facts.
But taking the red out of the history books would be considered as a part of the intolerance exercise by this Modi government, or probably something?
Certainly the change in the history books is called intolerance. But all over the world, history books are continually rewritten and updated. For example, in America, when we were children, we were taught the Native Americans were horrible savages who killed the innocent white settlers. Now it's recognized that the Native Americans were generally peaceful people who were massacred, oppressed, and had their culture destroyed by the aggressive white settlers, sometimes in the name of religion, sometimes in the name of progress and civilization. So we cannot accept these old colonial narratives. And the Marxist ones too. We say Marxist narratives are being thrown out everywhere. Why should they stay in India?
My last question would be about the present Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi.
Yes.
How do you rate him as a Prime Minister, as a politician in his last 3.5 years? And because many people still believe that you praise him and you rate him quite highly in your tweets and your...
Yes. Well, let's look at certain facts. Up to Modi, people in the West didn't even know who the Prime Minister of India was. And if they did, they would at most think of maybe Indira Gandhi or Nehru. Anybody in between, they
don't recognize.
India was not present on the world stage. No one really had heard Manmohan Singh speak or know what he represented and all of that. So Modi did put India on the stage of the world. And he did give the world the understanding that India is for economic development, scientific development, and also spiritual development, sharing its yoga traditions. Why did it take all the way to Narendra Modi for any government of India to really share things like yoga tradition with the world? In the India context, certainly he countered an era of tremendous corruption when he came in. And he's bringing about many positive changes within a very difficult society to change, as we know, with the history of the bureaucracy, with educational infrastructure issues. I think he has made a very great effort, and he seems to represent the interest of the country and an understanding of the cultural and spiritual traditions of the country, and to be a very sincere person. He's not just representing a dynasty, or he's not just representing some political ideology that may come from another part of the world.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frawley, for coming here and sharing your views with us. And half an hour is not a time then to discuss many issues, but we appreciate that you came and then you discuss with us. That's Dr. Frawley, and quite clear in his opinion. And when he talked that, from the Indian history books, that the red should be taken out of the textbooks, and Indian political history or Indian modern history should be rewritten, and India's Vedic culture should be told to the public at large, and that can be the course of the action of this present government. That's all we have in this special show. Thank you very much for watching us.